Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Harris, and I will be hosting, along with Kevin McPherson, this basketball podcast, which we hope you'll find available to you on YouTube, on Hogville, and we hope several other outlets before we're done. Kevin's going to join us in just a minute, and we'll be talking Razorback basketball with just two games now under their belt from this past week. See if he'll come on in just a few minutes. And we think you'll enjoy this from an insider's point of view, at least from Kevin's insider point of view, as he's around the program all the time. For me, you're going to be hearing from somebody who has been involved in covering Razorback basketball for about 47 years. And I think we've got Kevin joining us at this time to you. He can hear me. He's getting his face all set. Let's see if he's got a signal. Now he's going sideways. This will be interesting.
Let's not go sideways on the first one, Jim.
Yeah, your lighting's real interesting as well. But I was just introducing everybody. I was just introducing myself to everybody, Kevin. I was telling them I've covered Razorback basketball closely, professionally for about 47 years. Of course, I'm in Little Rock all the time, and I wouldn't think that I had an insider's point of view for many of those years. I'm kind of looking at it from almost outside, but you do have the inside look, not only for Razorback basketball, because you're covering the games and you're around Musselman and the team at different times of the year, but you're also covering recruiting probably as close as, you are covering recruiting in Arkansas basketball as close as anybody in the state. So we have that to offer folks in our podcast that we're kicking off here with 1 week under our belt with Razorback basketball, plus all the exhibitions. I know you want to talk about a lot of that, but I wanted to introduce everybody to our relationship in this. And as I said, I started out as a sports editor or sports writer and sports editor in Pine Bluff. I worked for the Arkansas Gazette for several years before it closed down. I've worked for Arkansas Times, Arkansas Business, helped start Arkansas Sports 360, which was part of Arkansas Business. We did that for several years. I've freelanced for many papers, many outlets around here. Right now, you can find me on the bestofarkansassports.com. I also appear on Hogville. I'm sorry. Well, I do comment on Hogville. You can find my columns sometimes there, but I'm also on the Hog Zone on Channel 11 talking football. But that's not what we're about. We're going to be talking basketball. Do catch me on Hog Zone for the next couple of weeks as we'll be wrapping up the season there on Channel 11. Kevin, in 1984, I'm covering the Arkansas North Carolina basketball game in Pine Bluff at the Pine Bluff Convention Center. Alvin Robertson and Joe Klein and Charles Ballantyne, the eventual hero, all those guys against Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, Brad Daugherty, Matt Doherty, Steve Hale had to fill in for Kenny the Jet Smith. You just remember all that. Kevin, when I was there covering the game, tell me what you were doing that day, because I know we're a few years apart, not that many, but what were you doing while I'm down there working covering a basketball game?
I was in the building. It was the last game I got to see with my dad. He would die just a few months later. He passed away in June. And so that was our last game together. He and my brother was along. So I was 14 years old and I rushed the court. I made us get there early because I wanted to, and I talked to Al McGuire, the famous color commentator for years for NBC. It was a nationally televised game. People forget, Jim, this was a February game. North Carolina wasn't just some casual number one. They were still unbeaten. They were 20-0, I think. So this is a late non-conference game. And you mentioned all those names. I mean, Michael Jordan wasn't who he became, but he was talked about a lot, and people knew he was probably the best player in college basketball. In fact, I remember my dad telling me, this guy, keep an eye on him because he may end up being one of the
Yeah.
greats. And I think it's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I think Dean Smith was the only guy to hold Michael Jordan to under 20 points a game. They always used to joke about that. I think he had 18 that day.
He had a well, and he had a great career in college. And, he came out
Yeah.
early, but
Well, he won Dean's first of two national
that's
championships.
right. As a freshman, he hit the shot. So when you're looking at Michael Jordan and you're in this building and you see that kind of an outcome where Arkansas does pull off the upset, I rush the court. I'm jumping up and down behind Eddie Sutton when Al McGuire's trying to interview him. It's on a YouTube clip out there. But it was a great day. It's one of the, in my opinion, one of the top 5 or 6 wins in Arkansas basketball history. Obviously, when you look at Nolan getting a national title and getting back to the title game, there's some other huge games in there. But to me, as far as a regular season game and winning and knowing who was on that court, the GOAT, and so many other guys that would be, have Hall of Fame careers, that was a big one. And look, just in that summer, you had Alvin Robertson and Joe Klein, Michael Jordan, and remember this, Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins. Where were they? They were on Team USA. It was the last group of collegians to win a gold medal. Bobby Knight was a coach. It was 84, and it was in Los Angeles. And I'll never forget that Bobby Knight said, he was quoted talking about Jordan after that experience, right as it was happening, or right at the end of it that summer, late that summer, and said, this is the best basketball player I've ever seen. So my dad was a little bit right? He already had my mind kind of turning and twisting and thinking about Jordan in that way before it actually happened. Now it's just even people that haven't seen him just accept this guy's the GOAT.
Yeah.
But then who knew really, but some guys were already starting to see it. All right. Anyway, so having been there, both of us in the building at the same time, we didn't know each other. We did work together at the Gazette before.
Yeah, flash forward about 6 years later, because I didn't know.
I followed you to the newspaper in Fayetteville, and what did you do when I get there? You left and came back to Central Arkansas. Thanks a lot, pal.
That's true, because about the time you joined, you came to work at the Gazette, if I remember, and you had a funny story about that.
Oh, that's right, I do.
Share with everybody about that. I do remember you mentioned Greg Henry. We were talking about this one time. Our nickname for Greg was Deputy Dog. I think his title was Deputy Sports Editor. But you're coming in, Orville's going out. Is that right?
Yeah, it was crazy. The famous Orville Henry, who I grew up reading, everybody knows who that is. And he was really the guy, right? I mean, when you talk about Razorback coverage, and it was done so much differently back then. You had the lead story start on the front page. It jumps inside, and it's almost a whole page of Orville Henry giving play-by-play quotes, all of it. So here's a guy that's an icon to me in sports writing. And the day that I'm coming into the Gazette, Greg Henry looks at me and goes, "Oh, that's right, you're starting today." He goes, "Can you come back another day?" And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, "Well, we're kind of busy around here." And I'm looking around, everybody's scrambling around. I'm like, "What's going on?" He goes, "Well, Orville Henry just left. He's going to Waco Media. He's going to be with the Democrat now." And so he said, "You know what? Actually, stick around. You might be able to help us." So I started that day. But I'll never forget, Paul Borden was cleaning up his office because he was going to be moving to Fayetteville to be the new beat for the Razorbacks. So they were hectic. But I'd like to tell everybody that it was an even swap, me for Orville Henry. I came from the Democrat to the Gazette. He left the Gazette and wrote for the Democrat. And everybody, it was a win-win for everybody.
It was. It really ended up being a win-win for all. Of course, I think I was also headed out the door, not to another paper, but I think the Gazette moved me to Fayetteville as well about that time to start covering. If it wasn't that time, it was the next year. I know that by 1990, I was living in Fayetteville then and being the beat writer for the Gazette. But you and I kept in contact a lot by then, and you were one of the first guys I ever remember that went to a recruiting announcement. I mean, now they're just They're huge.
Right.
Everybody has one. It's like their day in the sun. But you went over to Memphis, and Arkansas had already gotten a good foothold in Memphis. They'd signed Ron Huery, who kind of opened the door, and I know we want to talk about him a little bit, but
Yeah.
Todd Day, Arlen Bowers, there would be more. Obviously, some guys who would lead Arkansas to greater glory, but Arkansas had a foot in the door, and you went over and you were keeping up with Penny Hardaway before. I mean, a lot of people in the business knew who Penny Hardaway was by then, but you went and covered that announcement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I just had reached out to him weeks before his announcement, and we built a rapport and relationship. So I was following his recruiting, and reporting on it for the paper. He canceled the visit he was supposed to take to Temple, so I was constantly having running updates, and used to tease me all the time. What's Penny Hardaway doing today? What did he have for lunch? Stuff like
but
that.
we thought, I mean, he was really going to sign with Arkansas, it seemed like, almost up until the last moment.
Yeah, there was some, that was one of those things. I mean, I had people in his neighborhood that I guess were reading the Gazette there in Memphis call me on the news desk saying, "Hey, Penny Hardaway just left and went over to Memphis to watch him practice." And that's how I found out. I later found out he called Nolan and said, "Hey, I'm not coming to Arkansas. I'm going to Memphis." Then he went to a Memphis practice. So apparently when I was getting that news that night, just from some guy creeping around his house and paying attention, giving me a phone call about it, that's kind of how it played out. It was really interesting. I always thought it was really honestly down to those two. And I didn't have a feeling either way talking to him. I never felt like Arkansas was in the lead. There were people that thought that, but just talking to him, I never felt that way, but I thought they were right there.
Well,
and it really was down to those two. Oklahoma State, Temple was in there, and in that mix, but it was really down to those two. And
well, he wasn't the first guy, Kevin. He wasn't the first guy to get before the NIL, but I have a feeling FedEx made him a real NIL, or AutoZone, one of the two made him a real NIL offer that he couldn't say no to.
And Jim, look, I mean, going to play for Nolan Richardson, or you've got a choice for him and Larry Finch. And you saw the success that Huery, who we're going to talk about, Todd Day, some of those other guys that had already just come through. I mean, this was all happening at that time. And you make that decision, and I know it's his hometown, but yeah, there was more to it than just make me the best basketball player. And this guy was a great player. Everyone knew he was. Some services had him number one. He was getting comparisons to Magic Johnson because he was 6'7" and could play the point, do a lot of things for a big guard. And he was a great player. And so this was one of those guys that you talk about a program changer. If Arkansas gets him for a couple of years, along with what they already had, I'm not so sure we're not talking about 2 or 3 national titles.
Yeah, who knows?
And one's a great start.
Maybe not talking about winning the one they won. You never know. I mean, it could have flipped other things. I know we were disappointed they didn't get Hardaway. I know down the road we were disappointed. I know you and I were probably still hanging around covering stuff when they didn't get Gerald Honeycutt. Remember, that was for 95. That was like the missing piece to repeat as a national champion. He went to Tulane, but I remember everybody in the business world. I was at Arkansas Business at the time, and everybody's calling me at Arkansas Business, guys from Stevens and all these other businesses going, "Have you heard yet? Have you heard? Where's Honeycutt going?" and all that. But listen, you're
no internet to follow that stuff minute by minute, right?
Yeah,
but word of mouth.
But you sort of have been the guy. I mean, there's been other guys that done this too. Dudley Dawson spent a lot of signing deals, but I know that this is what you've been doing, for 30 years. And now of course, you mentioned the 6'7" guard like Magic Johnson. Now they're all 6'7", it seems like, or 6'5". Here we got a kid that you were covering last night, who signed. He doesn't attend school anymore in Little Rock. I think he's at is it Sunrise Christian in Kansas?
Yeah, Sunrise Christian Academy. That's right.
Yeah, but talk about Blocker and all that. You covered that. You've got video and you've got two interviews that you've got available that I saw on Twitter, but maybe they're available elsewhere. Talk a little bit about that if you would. And
Yeah, well, I've
excuse
been
me for
covering Layden
saying,
Blocker.
oh wait, and excuse me for the cardinal sin of saying talk about. I
I
hate,
do it all
I
the
know,
time.
talk about what you did. But anyway, Kevin, go ahead.
No, you're right, and in every interview I do, I say talk about,
Talk
I'm like
about.
later, I'm like, what did I do
Well,
that I
then
keep
Sam
doing it?
Pittman will go, was that supposed to be a question? That's what he said yesterday to somebody
It's a
asking to
command.
talk
It's a command.
about. I loved it.
Listen,
It was like, Sam, that was a good retort to the talk about statement from the reporter. But anyway, Kevin, uh, Layden Blocker signing. Where was that anyway? I saw the video. Was
yeah,
that
it was
here?
at Bordino's in Fayetteville.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you're tempted to go down to the wine bar and get started that way, but I was working, so I didn't do that. Look, I've been covering Layden Blocker, Jim, since he was an eighth grader. And the first time I saw him play, he was kind of small, playing with older guys, and he was very crafty and talented. I could see athletic talent in there, but he just was relentless, and he played to win, and he didn't back down. And they always say if a dog's going to bite, he'll do it when he's a pup. And
Yeah.
that's what I saw. That's a cliche, but it was perfect cliche for him. And I remember his grassroots spring and summer coach at the time. As soon as I got out of the gym, it was just a summer workout, bunch of players playing pickup ball. And I called his grassroots coach and I said, hey, man, you got a lot of older guys right now in your program that are being talked about, not only for high major schools, but for the pros maybe in a year or two. But this is one of your younger players. I'm like, look at your top 4 or 5 guys right now. This kid is in that group, even though he's so young. He's an eighth grader. I said, of all your guys, I said, I think he's in the top 4 or 5, and we're going to see that play out. And sure enough, it did. I mean, and this is about Layden Blocker, not about me seeing it that long ago.
Mhm.
He earned 5-star status this summer, Jim. He's top 25 player. He's a 5-star now. He did his official visit in June to Arkansas. A few weeks later, late June, he makes the commitment. Now it's official. Beautiful ceremony with his family. I've gotten to know those
Yeah,
folks,
saw
the
that.
Blockers. But he's a Razorback, and he's the lone commitment right now. We've got an announcement coming up in less than 48 hours on Tuesday with a couple players in Denver I want to talk about. But I don't want to leave out saying everything about Layden, because I think not only is he setting the standard for this class, being the first one off the board, not only do I feel like he's a legitimate guy when we start talking about 5 stars, but I think his competitiveness is right in the wheelhouse of what Eric Musselman loves about some of his best players, or some of the players he continues to talk about or tweet about. You can tell the ones that Musselman really likes because they do things in a way that's, in the spirit of how he likes to coach, which he wants to see energy, enthusiasm, but he likes players that learn and they value possessions and they play the right way, and they're going to give you everything on defense. Layden Blocker, I think, is going to be a perfect fit with Eric Musselman, and it's a great centerpiece to start this class off in 2023. And we know Arkansas's had a top 5 recruiting class 2 years ago. Last year, ranked second behind Duke. When you look at the high school part of it, I think with all 11, including the 5 transfer portal guys, I think it's probably the best overall class. But Layden Blocker is a great start for Eric Musselman in this next class for 2023.
Well, they have, I was just looking at the roster, and of course, they probably expect some of the freshmen. I think when they signed, they were likely one and done. We'll see. Here we are already talking about future recruiting. We're only 1 week into the season, but they have 4 seniors that they'll have to replace after this year, plus the potential of 2 or 3 guys at least maybe going early. Do you see another class like this one where it'll be a mix of, maybe 3 or 4 high school stars and then hit the portal again for some experience?
Yeah, so the Moses Moody class, you had 4 in-state kids all ranked top 100. That was a big high school class for Musselman. He also brought some guys in from the portal, Justin Smith, Jalen Tate. We know they went to an Elite Eight, and so a mix of high school and a mix of transfer portal made it a very successful blend. The year after that, they got 1 high school kid, Chance Moore, out of the Atlanta area, who's already transferred to Missouri State. And it was mostly portal guys.
Yeah.
This last class, I just said it, 11 newcomers out of 13 on scholarship, 6 freshmen, 5 portal. So another balance. I think this one's probably going to lean a little bit more portal. I think Arkansas is going to end up with 2 or 3 high school kids here in the early period. Blockers off the board. We're going to hear 2 more make commitments. I think either 1 or 2. I think Arkansas is going to get at least one of those, maybe 2. So they're going to have 2 or 3 signees. And I think in the spring, we're going to see attrition like we do all throughout college basketball. We know Musselman likes to turn over at least half that roster. So I think we might see a more portal heavy class this time than last time. I mean, last time was 6-5 in favor of high school. So +1 for high school. I think we might be in a +1 or 2 for portal this time around. We'll see how it plays out. That's what it looks like to me right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about this team, and I want to talk about this first week because I thought Friday night we saw some of the things I'm really excited about for this team, but there's still not a lot of returning leadership. When you turn over 11 guys and your only 2 players coming back are Kamani Johnson and Devo, who are I guess Kamani's a senior. Devo's still just a junior. I don't know if he's going to stay 4 years or not, but certainly you want to have, if you keep turning over rosters like that, it's hard to be ready to play or even to play an exhibition game at Texas, when you're just completely new like that. That exhibition game doesn't mean a hill of beans other than it certainly told them what they had to do that they may have thought they knew what they wanted to be and do as a team. And certainly Musselman had to sit there going, yeah, this is going to teach them what college basketball is really about. But we're here fresh off a Fordham game where Arkansas won by 20, was it 26? I almost forgot the score now, 74-48. Yeah, so, I mean, they won the Fordham game convincingly, and let's see, refresh.
They were +18 against North Dakota State on the scoreboard.
Yeah, so 2-0 in the regular season. Plus, you followed them in the exhibition run here at Texas. You went to Texas.
Yeah,
that game. They made that trip to Italy and Spain, I guess. We couldn't afford to send you to that. Sorry. The podcast had not gotten any sponsors by that point to send you. Maybe next year, but
right.
But you saw Friday night's game. You covered that. You made it a whole weekend basically at Fayetteville, I know. And fortunately, I saw you yesterday. You look a lot more rested today.
That's right. Well, first of all, I think what you said about Arkansas's experience in Austin against Texas and what Musselman must have been thinking, you said it beautifully because it really was. He fast-tracked that game to put it in front of the season to shock the system. Put the paddles on the chest and see who's going to respond. And I thought Arkansas fell apart in that second half, just completely fell apart. And I think guys came back to practice the next week probably humbled and understanding more and more why he drills down on things that he drills down on. Maybe some of you guys aren't as good as you think you are right now. The talent's there. And we've seen his teams, Jim, when he wasn't turning over 11 newcomers and it was half the roster. Right. We've seen him struggle late December, early January, and they get it turned around. He tweaks the rotation, but they have to learn some lessons. And I thought it was smart with so many newcomers, no matter how talented they are. Let's get a tough test in here before it even counts.
Yeah.
Let's see what they do. So I think part of what we saw this week, it's inferior competition, but I think part of what we saw in these dominant defensive efforts where you're turning these teams over. I mean, Arkansas forced Fordham into 30. They had 13 steals in that game. The prior game, they had 11 steals. These teams shot in the low 30s from the field, in the 20s from three. Arkansas, that's the blueprint of Musselman's best Arkansas teams are when they turn the corner, it starts on defense. So far, so good there. On offense, they're playing to their strengths. They're pounding that paint, getting to the rim, using all that length and athleticism he recruited because they sure can't shoot the three ball, but they can get to the basket. And so you stick to what works. You make that a priority. You don't fall in love with, well, we're getting left open from three. Let's just take a lot. That actually happened in the first half against Fordham, and I thought they did a good job of adjusting it at halftime. And so for, 3 of the 4 halves, they've done a great job of getting to the rim. Now, The Texas game, going back to that and looking at this, I think several things. I think individually, certain guys have realized they need to step up. Mekhi Mitchell had a good first half in Texas after being almost non-existent in Europe.
Yeah.
He's got rewarded with 2 starts and produced. I look at Devo Davis. Trevon Brazile had 1 basket and 1 rebound at Texas.
Yeah.
He's averaging a double-double through the first 2 games.
Right.
Here's a guy that's turned it on in the blue-collar work in addition to scoring. Ricky Council's leading this team in scoring in 2 games.
Yeah. He's
after
really
2 games, and he led in both games, but he had 7 assists in the last game. So Musman's starting to drill down and tighten up to a 7 or 8 rotation. But because of that length and versatility and big size relative to positions, he's able to get guys to play different roles as he sees fit based on matchups. So 7 or 8 guys, you're thinking, well, there's a lot of talent on this roster. He's drilling it down, but he's using guys differently, even within games. Ricky Council may be on the ball for 5 or 6 minutes in this game, but he'll also play off the ball. Same with Anthony Black. Same with Devo Davis. Even a guy like Brazile, who you're thinking is more of a stretch 4, he's going in and doing the dirty work right now. So we'll see if they can maintain that as they move forward. Maui's coming up, but man, Arkansas really, I thought, did a great job in week 1 without Nick Smith Jr., by the way, who's projected by some to be an All-American freshman of the year, led the team in scoring in the preseason after getting shellacked at Texas and then coming in and not having your best player. Arkansas gets an A for week 1, Jim.
What's your inside look at Nick Smith? What's going on with him? When can we see him back?
Great question. I think he's, the Musman says he's day-to-day. Here's how this was phrased when it came out in the release, okay? It's precautionary. It's management. So you hear about load management in professional sports a lot. And I trust this phrasing. So in other words, I don't think it's a serious injury. I think it might be something that could be problematic if he's not, getting it right. And so to me, that tells me this is going to be a short-lived missing out of action situation. It's not going to be a major chunk of the season, I don't believe. And again, I don't think it's serious. I think they're making sure it doesn't turn into something serious. So to give you something more definitive, I'll be surprised if we see him by the time Arkansas plays in Maui. Not shocked, but surprised. But I think sometime after that and before January, there's rumors out there he's not going to be ready till SEC play. We don't know how it's going to play out, but I think it'll be somewhere in between maybe Maui and that. Just me guessing. No one's told me that. Just kind of my feel on it, because I'm looking at the time frame when he tweaked the knee in Europe in that last game, came out of the second quarter, didn't finish that game, missed practice time when they got back for a while. Yeah. So I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I don't think it's going to be a long-lived absence, although that's subjective. Some people think it's long-lived already. They wanted to see him in game 1. So,
right. Well, I mean, he is probably the 3-point shooter on the team in my book. I mean, I think he's a potential 40% shooter from 3-point now. And gosh, his will to win, which was so obvious in high school, if you got to see him play and that kind of thing, is just another ingredient. I like the ingredients I saw on the court without him the other night. So maybe it'll give other guys a chance to step up and bond. But I love how fast this team is. He'll bring more speed to them, but I like how fast they move. I like how long they are. If you're a basketball player and you're going up against a guy with that kind of length and a 6'7" guard is on top of you, that's why shooting percentages by opponents drop down, to 16, 18% from 3. Start matching the Arkansas 3-point shooting, because it was only 12.5 against Fordham, but that's not what they had. They won because of this dominance that I see inside. They don't have the one guy, the Jalen Williams, that brought it every night, but they do have a great sort of a rotation of inside players that I think are going to be able to give them a lot of muscle, a lot of fallback, a lot of follow shots, a lot of, just rebounding presence that matters night after night, both in the SEC and then in the NCAA tournament. That's the teams that advance, the ones that, just dominate the boards and limit the shots from the outside.
So several things. We didn't see all that recruited size out of the portal, we didn't really see it show up in Europe. Kamani Johnson was kind of the consistent guy.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to see that. We're starting to see some of that play out. And I think you're right. I think a guy like Mekhi Mitchell, you need that 6'9" guy with quickness and athleticism and length and some know-how around the basket, because once you get away from that mid-major part of your schedule and you get into the teeth of the SEC, those are the kind of bodies Arkansas is going to have to deal with. So they need to have their own that can go in there and mix it up. And he's starting to show that. He's showing some real value. That's one example. Talked about Brazil being a double-double guy so far. The other thing that I find interesting, this is the hidden gem so far, Jim. I think Arkansas's cut its turnover. They were 21 turnovers a game in Europe, 4 games. They were awful at Texas, 23. They've got a total of 24 in 2 games. Musman likes to be at 9 or less per game. They're a little over that, but they forced 30 in this last game. They've gobbled up 24 steals in 2 games. And so when you don't turn the ball over, not only are you getting more attempts getting to the basket because you didn't turn it over, but a lot of times with turnovers, it's live ball and the other team's going the way getting an easy score. Sure. So it helps your defense when it's not having to get back after a turnover. And now you're setting up at half court where I think Arkansas has a ton of advantages. And that's why we've seen them really be dominant on both ends so far. But I think, to me, that sort of that hidden silver lining is they've really shrunk down the turnovers and they're keeping their 3-point shot attempts down too, which is a weakness. So I think those were their 2 biggest weaknesses, and they've addressed those with execution, not just talking points. They've gone out and executed.
Well, next game up is Wednesday night, South Dakota State.
That's right.
And I think you think, just from us talking, that they'll present a much tougher test than what they've seen so far. And as far as real games, they're not Texas, but
right.
So
no, you're right. I think they're going to present Arkansas. They've got a little balance. They've got 4 players so far early on in double-figure scoring, but a couple of those are sort of versatile forwards. A couple of guards that can shoot. So it's not just a solid backcourt, and it's not just a solid front line. They've got some pieces interchangeable, and they're proficient, and they've been efficient. And I think for Arkansas, it's good to scale up the challenge before you go to Maui. Louisville's not going to be very good. They're not very good right now. That's Arkansas's first opponent, Maui. But they'll present things Arkansas hasn't seen yet either, because they recruit a little higher level than some of these mid-majors. But I like the stair step. Week 1, it's not that these were just awful teams, but I do think South Dakota State's a little better. That's your one and only game in week 2. And then the following week, you go to Maui for 3 games in 3 days, right before Thanksgiving. Then you come back home. Yeah. So, and it's back to a mid-major.
I keep forgetting this is not a Christmas Maui tournament. This is Thanksgiving. This is right around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think this is a good test for Arkansas. Again, I think Arkansas gets to 3-0. I'll make a prediction. Don't want to fall flat on my face with a score prediction, but I'll do that too. I think Arkansas is probably in that 15 to 20 point winning margin wheelhouse if it plays like it did in the first 2 games. If Arkansas is flat, or has a bad half like they did in the second half at Texas, obviously things you can lose a game against a mid-major. There are no more guaranteed bye wins in college basketball, so those things can happen. But I look for Arkansas to take care of business, Jim, and get to 3-0 heading over to Maui a week later.
Well, we'll talk about the Maui trip on our next podcast. Here to wrap it up tonight. Not to be the downer of the show after all this good news, but I got a personal gut punch when a good friend of mine from when I worked up there in Fayetteville covering the Razorbacks, and pretty much since then I've run into him a few times, but Arkansas great Ron Huery, the guy that really, whose recruitment to Arkansas opened the doors to Memphis, passed away. I think he was just at age 55. That's awful sad. We lost Lindsey Howell within the last year too. Both of those guys were part of the run to the Final Four in 1990. I had spoken with some other people about Huery just being what a great guy. Of all those great players they've had up there, I mean, I don't think there was a nicer more personable fella than what Ron Huery was. What he and what a lot of people don't know, and this was still about that time you were kind of running around the court at Pine Bluff Convention Center. When Nolan was at Tulsa, he came to see the King Cotton Classic. He still had that job. It was the year he would get the Arkansas job the next April, but we didn't know that at the time. But he
Yeah.
was there to see Huery. Huery was playing for Memphis Whitehaven. He was
Yeah.
actually scouting a lot of guys, but he already had a relationship with Huery, and he was even talking in terms of with the Paul Pressey example. They were
Yeah.
similar players that he was going to be able to recruit Ron Huery to Tulsa. So when he got the Arkansas job, Huery was part of his first big class. It had,
Yeah.
Philip McKellar, Cannon Whitby,
Larry Marks.
Marks,
Yeah.
But Ron was the guy, and he was the guy also that would kind of open the door for all those guys we just mentioned: Todd Day, Arlen Bowers, a bunch of these guys from Clyde Fletcher, who was a teammate with him at Memphis Whitehaven, and then it would lead on to Corey Beck, Dwight Stewart, Elmer Martin, all those guys that were part of the national championship team in '94. I just think that it was so great that, that last year he was able to join the Arkansas Hall of Honor. That's a guy whose name should be up there as a guy that not only contributed as a player, but his impact on the basketball program as a player is still being felt now.
I'd like to talk about that. He was the first of 8 McDonald's All-Americans for Nolan. I went to basketball camp in Fayetteville when he was there. He and Clyde Fletcher were there, and because he's a year older than me. But the first of, you mentioned the pipeline to Memphis, first of 8 McDonald's All-Americans. But back then, when he was a McDonald's All-American, they played 2 games. They played the Capitol Classic in Washington, D.C., the McDonald's team versus some of the best players from that era. If you remember, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., that area's always been a hotbed for talent. So they had that game. It was sponsored by McDonald's, and then they had the regular McDonald's All-American game. So I got to see Ron Huery playing both of those. But having seen him play in person before he was ever a Razorback, and then seeing those events. But then when he was a freshman, the promise he showed, some of the things he did, I mean, they beat Danny Manning in Kansas, who's ranked in the top 10 in Fayetteville. William Mills was still around. He played in that game. Kenny Hudson, that group, Ratliff, some of those guys. But then you look at what he did. To me, what really changed things for the program at this time is the NIT at the postseason. Arkansas State, they didn't schedule games like that under Frank Broyles. That was and they were down 20 plus in that game.
Yep.
And the word was Nolan's out if they lose that game. Now I've heard people say that wouldn't have happened. I've heard plenty of people say it would. Ron Huery was a big part of that comeback, getting that game to overtime. He played against Duke in the season that Arkansas beat Duke in the preseason NIT.
He did.
Duke was on to win the national title, upset UNLV.
He had
Arkansas to get to that Final Four in Denver. He had some big games against UNLV in back-to-back seasons.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This was a special guy in Razorback history that doesn't get talked about. If you look, he's a 1,500 point scorer, top 15 all-time scoring, top 10, I think, in assists. He's top. So he just did a lot of things that helped the brand, and he probably didn't get the recognition of other guys, even from Memphis. When you start talking about Todd Day,
he didn't. He didn't win a national championship. He was troubled a lot of times. He had some ups and downs, but he's always fighting through those troubles. He got suspended for a whole year, and that made him a 5-year player. He was actually a 5th-year senior. He didn't go pro. They didn't have a lot going pro anyway after a year or two back then. But he fought different things from his upbringing. If you knew what his upbringing was like, you probably could understand a lot of what he went through. He's always fighting through that, and he always had an upbeat attitude. And I just love the guy. I remember just running into him at My Pleasure, whatever those clubs were.
Yeah.
He was everybody
right there off
knew
college.
the guy. Everybody knew him, and and he was a genuine guy. He didn't hit me as a cocky athlete. I mean, we could talk about this all the time. We just don't have enough time tonight, but it's a great loss, but just,
Well,
just remember that
that
the
year,
program is
that year
where we
he
are
set
now.
out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That year he set out, Day and Mayberry in that group, Oliver Miller, they were freshmen.
Yeah.
So he missed their freshman year, and then he comes back. They had Lindsey Howell. So you had Mario Credit, Oliver Miller. That team was really, really outstanding. Didn't win a title, but we know they did get to a Final Four. And then an Elite Eight in his final season, which is his best statistical season, was his senior year. So he really put it together again in his swan song as a Razorback.
Well, we got to cut it off, Kevin, but thanks for doing it this week. We'll be back again with the next podcast in a few days. See you
Thanks,
later.
Jeff. Good to be with you.